So it seems like there are so many ongoing political problems throughout the world, and especially in the first quarter of 2023, it gets so hot already. Conflicts between Russia and Ukraine marking 1 year, as well as the US, China, Russia, North Korea, and other global issues would constantly create new circumstances.
Yes, as we spoke with the ambassador of Russian Federation for Indonesia yesterday, we actually want the same thing, peace.
Peace.
But in the light of that, I'm just going to put my
Please put it aside.
weapon down as a sign of truce. But joining us in the studio is Mr. Quinton Temby, an international relations expert from Monash University and also author of Terrorism in Indonesia After Islamic State, to talk more about the geopolitical climate in 2023.
Welcome.
Good afternoon, sir.
Thank you. Thank
Selamat
you.
datang.
Yeah, terima kasih. Thanks for having me.
Of course, it's an honor. And also, thank you so much for celebrating our second anniversary in the studio.
Of course, if I'd known, I would have dressed up.
We have a spare for that note. But
We do have a Papua type
yeah, we do.
Of course.
costume if you would like to wear one.
But okay, so let's jump into our discussion for today. So some of our research showed that after Russia launched its aggression against Ukraine, other countries also started to be more averse in creating conflicts against other countries. What's your take on that?
Well, my take is it's not that bad yet, is it? Except in Europe, that's obviously true. So the war in Ukraine has clearly transformed Europe in a way no one could have imagined even 14 months ago. So countries have militarized. It's Germany, for example, has done a 180-degree flip in terms of gearing up its own military for the first time post-World War II. So it's really the biggest event in European security since the Second World War.
So what do you think that impacts to the other part of, you're talking about Europe, right? What about us, for example, in Asia? Do you think that has a big impact as well? Other than, the supply chain and the things like that?
Yeah, I think there's a risk, right? So for Europe, obviously, the risk is most acute there. There's a risk of the conflict spreading, of NATO becoming involved, of there's nuclear risk on the table there. And I think the challenge for our region, for Southeast Asia, is to not let it spread to this region and not be drawn into sort of the hardening of the world into two different blocks, one against the other, like a sort of second Cold War. And I think that's the challenge for this region to avoid that fate. Right.
Well, we heard that the US thought that China might send weaponry to Russia, and even himself, Zelensky, he said if it happens that way, perhaps the World War III might happen. So what is your take on this? I mean, the West and US has been pulling all sorts of weaponry and giving it to Ukraine. And Russia is still on the same stance. You give us that, we'll return that as well. So this is never ending. What do you think?
Well, hopefully Zelensky's wrong in this case about it being World War III.
Well, we all hope the same.
But certainly it would be a kind of proxy conflict between the US and China in that case, wouldn't it? If China's arming one side and the US is arming the other. So I don't think it's clear yet whether China is actually going to do that. There was some intelligence the US was talking about releasing. I haven't seen that come to fruition yet. But yeah, there's the risk again that if that happens, then there is a kind of Cold War type situation with the US versus China and Russia on the other side.
It's sort of like sending the US and Chinese relationship into even darker place, because before this we saw like they grew apart, they went to separate ways, and also with the situation in Ukraine and Russia as well, we see like them being even more polarized.
They even got so panicked just about a balloon.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I was about to say about that balloon, and that event took place just like very momentous, like before some historical milestones for America in that sense. I heard about experts in countries saying that, well, right now America and China are at odds, but what are actually both countries seeking?
Right. I thought you were going to ask me what the balloons were. I'm glad you didn't ask that because no one seems to know. I saw Russia had its own balloon scare recently as well. What are both countries seeking? Well, they're, I guess, in a sort of simplistic way, they're all seeking peace. But the question is, peace on what terms? So I see China's released its 12-point peace plan, which would kind of sort of seems like it might be aiming to lock in Russia's gains and seek a ceasefire with the territories Russia currently holds in Ukraine, which is obviously unacceptable to Zelensky and to the Ukrainian government. So yeah, this is a question though, whether that can be avoided or whether that is inevitably where we're going to be anyway, because the war does seem to be in a kind of stalemate situation.
I've always been thinking, I mean, this looks like it's not only just about Ukraine and Russia, certainly. It's about Russia against some bunch of other countries.
Yeah.
And perhaps Russia with China and, I don't know, Turkey, India, maybe, I don't know yet. But what is your take on this? If this war is still, going to go for longer than what all of us would have expected?
Yeah, I think that sort of plays into Russia's hands if it goes longer, because then Russia can claim it has something of a victory in at least incapacitating Ukraine, stopping Ukraine from integrating with the EU and certainly with NATO. Yeah. So I think that's sort of almost like the best case scenario, and obviously a worst case scenario are things we wouldn't want to imagine.
Well, this is something that we need to look closely about the updates as well, but because this far, after 1 year, we haven't been seeing any, progress, like significant progress on global efforts in curbing the war and also, making the peace come true. But on that note, we are in a very happy celebration.
Yes.
Let's leave all those dark moments behind for now. But I want to ask about the celebration, because you're from Australia.
I am.
We've seen lots of fireworks during any celebrations in Australia and stuff like that. But how is it different compared to Indonesia? Because you've been living in Indonesia for like
1 year?
Yeah,
a year.
1 year, yeah.
And how have you seen it?
What is well, where do I start? But I mean, in terms of celebrations, I mean, it depends, obviously. Australia is a very diverse country. I think over half the population now has a migrant background in Australia. So it really depends on what people's particular cultural background is. But often you have a lot of mixing, like you do in Indonesia, different cultural and let's say culinary traditions.
I was about to say that.
Yeah,
like, I love mixing because I love more food.
But I like Vegemite.
Yeah. Well, yeah. When I came back to Indonesia this stint, I contacted a friend in advance and said, "Is there anything urgent, crucial you want me to bring you from Australia?" And I thought because it's pandemic time, it's hard to get things logistically. And my friend said, "Yes, absolutely desperate for Vegemite."
Oh,
yeah, so that really
wow,
people in Vegemite, it's like Indonesian people with belacan or terasi.
That's right.
It's there's nothing in between. Like either you hate it or you love it.
Yeah, it's almost like some kind of implicit test of something.
But I mean, it's a good thing to know that Albanese came here, the very first place that he was on office, and we hope that Indonesia and Australia's relationship will also be better and better in the future. Right.
And also, we have
going that way, yeah.
Yeah, and also we hope that the situation in the world could actually go to a much better life.
No more propaganda.
Yeah, I think there's a good chance with that. I think this region is pretty stable. It's increasingly prosperous. Indonesia is a leader of the non-aligned movement in this, and I think I'm quite hopeful about the future.
I just have one just very close, short question. Indonesia has been hosting many international events, big events like the G20, now the ASEAN, and the U20 of the sports event, and also before that we had in the stadium as well in Yogyakarta and stadium of Kanjuruhan. So what do you think Indonesia is at the level compared to all of the geopolitical situation right now?
I think Indonesia's becoming increasingly prominent, but I would like to see Indonesia become even more effective and and prominent on the international stage. Indonesia is a large country. It's obviously the most influential country in Southeast Asia. And I think, as we saw during the G20, there was a moment there, in fact, where a Russian missile was fired, and the leaders took a break to try to figure out what that was and how to respond. And Indonesia was a platform for a tense moment there on the international stage. I think we could see more of that, and Indonesia would be very well placed to play a peacemaker role, particularly as a non-aligned country.
All right.
Let's hope everything will actually go to a better state. Mr. Temby, thank you so much.
Thank you so
for coming here.
One time, when you go back from Australia, please bring some back.
As you might.
Of course. Thanks for having me.